you're not going to have to see my face at all, you lucky devils. Instead, I am, as you can make out, at my computer. Now, I have sketched out a rough plan of the boat. It's not particularly accurate in terms of dimensions, but it's a layout, and as we will see, it has various layers to it. Because what I'm doing is trying to get some idea, and it's only rough at this stage, of what I'm going to need in terms of electrical, water, and so on, and roughly where it's going to go on the boat itself. So there are a large number of layers. We've got the layout of the boat there. Broadly speaking, these purple patches are external storage, so we've got the cabin lockers on both sides, and then the rear locker. It's not really a locker, I guess. There are sort of a couple of bits more than are shown, but this section here is hard to access. This section here has the sink on top of it, but with a cupboard underneath, and then on either side we've got the sort of shelf units, and then there will be some sort of shelving. Originally, I think the boat shipped with shelving, but that's been lost along the way. But some sort of shelving or storage running around the outside of the interior of the cabin. And then we've got the sleeping areas. This is effectively the bulkheads with the quarter berths here and here, and the V berth up the front. On the internal storage, I have included the sort of triangle at the very front of the boat, which is currently an anchor locker, but I'm wondering whether to actually convert it to internal storage and just keep the anchor rope on the outside of the boat. There may be pros and cons to all of this, which I haven't thought of, so by all means do let me know your thoughts in the comments. So with that out of the way, what are my broad requirements? Well, I've taken the decision not to have any hookup or shore power, I suppose one would call it, on the boat. 12 volts only. I've already bought a big battery, 130 amp hours, but I don't really want to be messing about with shore power. If it's all 12 volts and I can do all the wiring myself, not going to have an inverter. There is obviously no inboard engine, so there's no alternator, but that means that unless I take the battery home and charge it, the only way of charging it will be whatever I can generate on the boat itself. Unless, of course, I get an outboard which has some sort of alternator built in. I don't know if that's an option, but I imagine it's more expensive. So to that end, the battery needs to be accessible and needs to also be housed basically in somewhere that I can easily remove. So I think I'm going to put the battery in one of the lockers in the cockpit, put it in one of these battery boxes, and then we'll probably, again, just for the sake of safety, vent it to a very small vent on the side of the boat. It's relatively rare, I think, that these batteries leak, but just in case, then at least it's going to go over the side of the boat rather than pool in the locker or whatever it may be. So ignore these black lines for the moment, they're the rest of the wiring. But with the battery there, the obvious point to then have the main electrics is in some sort of cabinet or box or whatever above the corresponding shelf, so in this case on the port side of the boat. I can box off a lot of it and then just have a switch panel on the front, but have it open so that, you know, if I need to get in for fuses or to add more things in or whatever it may be, it's nice and accessible. Now, I did originally quite like the look of these sort of retro-esque I do think they're quite funky, but for labelling purposes, and they're probably not a suitable metal for the marine environment. So I discounted those, but then also I came across this bilge switch while I was browsing. Now, if you'll remember, the bilge pump that I've got has two wires, either for automatic operation based on the float switch or for manual operation. So this switch, which is, I mean, it's about 20 quid just for the switch alone, but you know, it's probably worth it, will allow me to toggle between those different settings at will. And that kind of then dictates really the look of the rest of the switches, because I've got a little bit of OCD going on. I do like things to match. And switch panels like this are everywhere. And you know what? They're everywhere for a reason. They're cheap, they're flexible, you can get them in 2s and 4s with, as you see here, with charging points, without charging points, with a socket for a 12-volt cigarette lighter, labels, and so on. So I'm not great on the aesthetics of them. I don't think they look particularly cool, but they do the job, and I don't want to start putting lipstick on a pig by shelling out for really expensive switch panels and so on when it won't really fit. So that will all go there. The benefit of that is that I can then hook up the instrumentation, and I haven't really figured out what I need in the way of instrumentation, but depth finder, GPS, you know, weather machine or whatever it may be. I can hook that up straight through the wall behind and have it visible in the cockpit nice and easily. So that seems to be the simplest layout. I am going to have a small fuse panel here, as we will come on to. But let's start working our way through what we need. Well, the obvious one, so that nobody hits me in the dark, is navigation lights. It's a small boat, so the requirements are relatively simple, but I'm going slightly above what I think is needed. So just port and starboard navigation lights, and then one at the front. I don't know if it's an anchor light or whatever it may be. And those will be controlled by a switch back at the switch panel. And there are nice obvious locations for them. They're not going to be too expensive to buy. I haven't really looked at what particular ones I'm going to buy, but that much is nice and easy. So for the internal lights, I'm going to have, try and move that somewhere out of the way, I'm going to have a beam of wood running down the centre of the ceiling of the cockpit, partly for decorative reasons, but then I'm going to fit into it 3 of these low profile lights in white, and then hopefully I'm going to also try and fit in 2 in red, just in case I'm out at night. From what I can gather, having a red light in the cabin is a little bit better for your night vision, should that be necessary. But the other benefit of having some sort of wooden beam running down here is I can hide a lot of the wiring in it. So these should be able to sit flush within it, and then I can hide the wiring that goes out to the navigation lights, that goes out to the solar panels, which we'll come on to, can all be tucked behind it, which means that it's nice and easy to access. I don't want to be, you know, having to take the boat half apart if I need to fix the wiring or add something else in. So that's the internal lights. External lights are going to be relatively simple, probably 2, possibly 4 in the cockpit, controlled by a switch from just inside. I might have white ones and red ones again, I'm not sure. The solar itself is going to be at least 1, possibly 2 50-watt solar panels. There isn't a huge amount of space on the boat. And actually, where I've marked these solar panels is probably the wrong location, because having looked, I don't think there's room to fit them in on the side of the boat. There should be, however, room to fit them in on the front of the cabin roof. should be room for two, should I need two. However, if I then put what I now know is not a window, but is a light into the front of the cabin roof, then I would need to lose one of the two. 50 watts should be enough to generate sufficient to keep the battery definitely topped up over winter, and also to counteract any usage over a long weekend or a week sailing in the summer months. All of the things that I'm putting in are very low draw, LED lights, maybe charging stations or whatever I'll come on to. Nothing is really going to be drawing a huge amount of power. So my usage should be relatively low, and therefore the amount of solar required to keep it topped up should also be relatively low. Internally, we're going to have a little separate fuse panel here just so that I can run one positive and one negative from the main fuse board down to here, which will in turn supply four. I was initially going to have USB sockets and reading lights for each of the four berths. However, I've discovered that they now make integrated reading lights and chargers, which I suspect will make things a little bit easier and mean fewer things to wire up. So something like that, not necessarily that precise model, would be a good idea. And then, of course, I will need some way of listening to Test Match Special. So a DAB radio with Bluetooth, probably mounted, the actual radio unit mounted with the rest of the electricals, and then speakers in the cockpit and speakers probably tucked behind the cabin. So that's a pretty decent shopping list. I mean, none of it really is massively expensive, and all of it is kind of removable should the need arise. Probably the two biggest items on there are the solar panels and the charge controller and the battery. The rest of it is all, sort of 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds here and there. So there's a lot of stuff. However, the benefit of planning things out like this is that, okay, it looks like a bit of a mess, but it means that you know where you're going from the outset, and you can cater accordingly. And you can also, and I think this is quite important, build in a bit of leeway. So if you've got 12 circuits, let's say, just buy a bigger fuse panel. Go for one with 18 or 24 or whatever it may be, just in case, so that you don't need to rewire everything if it turns out that there's something else that you need to stick in. Just build in a bit of padding from the outset. And also try and keep the wiring hidden but accessible, so that if something goes wrong or if you need to add in new stuff down the line, then you can do. So that's it. I'm going to go shopping now.